Hello everyone, it's Becky. I'm back to talk to you about the portfolio reflective essay for Read 729. This is going to be a little lengthy of a video, so kind of, stick with me. If I were you, I would have the rubric in front of you. It's really long, it's really detailed, but I'm going to break it down for you so that it's not quite as daunting as it looks. So we're going to go through this, but what I want you to do is I want you to think about, be in the mindset that this is a reflective essay and it is meant to take a look back, reflect on your experiences in the READ program. So what it is going to ask you to do, and what I will ask you to do, is go back and think about the courses that you've taken, because you will be asked to make connections here in this essay. And so if you think about it in those terms, looking at it section by section, you'll start to think about the actual courses that you took, and hopefully you'll be able to, come across, you know, a good reflective essay. I am going to post examples so that you can see how others have done it. I am not putting a page limit on this at this point because we did just change the rubric in the fall, and we're still tweaking things just in terms of expectations. So originally it was for each section here, it was supposed to be a page. So there are, the sections are the foundation knowledge, instruction, assessment, diversity, um, literate environment, and professional learning, and leadership. So originally it was supposed to be a page for each of those sections. There's no way you're gonna keep to a page. So my suggestion to you is that as you start to write, don't write with a page number over your head. What I want you to do is I want you to write, and I want you to be as complete as you can. I would just, that's how I would go about it, because I think it's harder to write with a number, page number over your head, and I don't think that we get the quality that we want when we do that. So that's how, if you can frame it like that and just take it piece by piece. I'm going to walk you through this piece by piece, and hopefully it won't be as daunting. And certainly, if we need a phone conference as you start to write the essay, we can certainly do that. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about the foundation knowledge. And in this section, what you are going to do is talk about your theories of literacy and research studies. So I want you to think back to Read 601, and I want you to go back, maybe hopefully you still have your textbooks, and talk about theorists and whatnots, because that's going to help you out with the foundation knowledge. Now in this section, you're going to critique and contrast at least three key theories of literacy. Name the theorist, explain how they relate to the classroom practices and materials, your classroom practices and materials. Original insights are valued. Second box there, synthesize the work of at least three key leaders of different strands of research that are important in the history of the field of literacy. Articulate how these studies impact your literacy instruction. So, for that one section, for the top section, let's talk about three key theories of literacy. You're going to talk about the theorist associated with that. You're going to explain how those theories, each one of them, relate to the classroom practices and materials. Then you're going to talk about three key leaders of different strands of research. These are not theorists, these are research leaders. So totally separate. And again, I'm going to go through these. I'm going to clarify some of the terminology and whatnot, but then when you see the examples that I provide to you, hopefully you'll be able to put two and two together and be successful. So that's the foundation knowledge section. Pretty quick and easy. I'm not going to put a page limit on it. You'll be, as you see the examples, you'll see how much and in how much detail people went. You do not need to go into a exorbitant amount of detail. Okay, you're going to basically name three theories. You're going to talk about the theorist associated with that theory and explain how does that theory relate to my classroom. How does it look? And by doing that, your original insights are put into the paper. Then with these research leaders, again, talk about how those three pieces of research impacted your classroom instruction. And you talk about them one by one by one. So research leader number 1, number 2, number 3. That's foundation knowledge section. Then in the instruction section, you get to think about and talk about situations in which you used curriculum and instruction that was research-based. Describe how you supported other teachers in using instruction or designing curriculum that meets the specific needs of students. So a lot of the language that you hear in this rubric is you talking about situations, and then how did you coach others? Because really, as a reading specialist, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be coaching teachers along and working with other professionals and to try to get them to use various strategies in their classrooms, etc. So you're going to hear that a lot through this rubric. Just make sure that where you're asked to do so, that you do give an example of how you have coached others. If you haven't had a situation where you've coached others, so to speak, then talk about a situation, talk about how you would coach others. Talk about what you would do. If something isn't relevant to you right now, talk about a hypothetical experience, and that would suffice for that particular section, if that makes sense. So here under instruction, provide at least 2 examples of specific instruction you have done that notes respect for the needs of students and the different approaches to teaching or differentiation. And then 1 example of how you coached others to provide that appropriate instruction. So this section talks about differentiation. The second part of the instruction piece here, that final box on the first page, talks about providing 2 examples of instructional approaches for word recognition, comprehension, metacognition, or reading, writing connections. So 2 examples. So you can do 1 example for word recognition, or 1 example for comprehension, or an example for comprehension, 1 for metacognition, whatever you choose, but it's simply 2 examples. Any combination you want. Then provide 1 example of how you have coached others for instruction in these specific areas. Again, if you haven't had a chance to do that, talk about a hypothetical situation and what you would do. And that, again, is okay. The final section for instruction talks about giving 3 examples of your use or your support of a colleague's use of a wide range of text, print, digital, and online. Use a critical stance to evaluate these texts. So think about how you have used a wide variety of instructional materials. Because as a reading specialist, you're going to have to know what's out there. You're going to have to say, hey, I have this. Here, why don't you use this? Here, use this. So that's kind of what this section is talking about. And a critical stance is, well, why don't you evaluate, something that you've used? Maybe there was a piece of digital text that you used that you thought was phenomenal, that you would highly recommend. Or maybe there was an online piece of text that you would use that you wouldn't necessarily recommend. Take it from that critical stance. So that's the instruction piece. The third section is the assessment section. Explain the purposes, strengths, and limitations of literacy assessments, because that's another part of a reading specialist's job, is to be able to provide, pick what assessments you're going to use to get to the bottom of how are you going to help these students or this one student. So first section in the assessment piece, I'm right here if you lost me. Explain specific purposes, strengths, and limitations of at least 3 assessments. So what you're going to do is you're going to think back and pick and talk about 3 assessments that you have administered in the time that you've been in the READ program, or 3 assessments that you use in your classroom, whatever the case may be. Talk about their purposes, their strengths, and their limitations. Okay? So 3 different assessments addressing all of those factors. The next section, under assessment, illustrate all of the following. Number 1, appropriate choice of assessment for a student, strong analysis of the results to delineate the student's strengths and needs, and then a logical association between assessment and instruction. Think back to think back to your coursework. Think back to how maybe a case study that you've done would fit into that, and you could describe that case study here in this section. But you do have to address all three, numbers 1, 2, and 3. The next section of the assessment, which is the last on the box of the assessment section on page 2, robustly illustrate all of the following. Use multiple data sources to analyze and plan a small group, whole class, or school's literacy instruction. Now you notice it says or, not and. So you're going to, maybe you might talk about multiple data sources to analyze and plan for a small group, or a whole class, or an entire school. You don't have to do all three of those. You do have to talk about number 2, which is lead teachers in analyzing and using classroom, individual, grade level, or school-wide assessment data to make instructional decisions. You do have to talk about that. So there's 2 parts to that section. Numbers 1 and 2. The final section on assessment is providing 3 examples of communication to a variety of stakeholders related to literacy assessment and how assessment is linked to instruction. So let's talk about the communication piece, because as a reading specialist, you're going to be communicating, results to other professionals, parents, other teachers. So that's what this section is all about. So 3 examples of communication that you could use to communicate literacy assessment scores and whatnot. The section on diversity. This is quite a long one. Just a lot of words, a lot of verbiage here. So the first section has 3 pieces to it, but you only have to illustrate 2 of the following to get an outstanding in this section. Number 1, acknowledge how diversity influences the reading and writing development of all students. Assist teachers and parents or others in understanding the links between literacy and diversity, including the relationship between first and second language acquisition. And number 3, explain how your own culture may limit your professional practice and what you have done to bridge the gap. So what you have to do is address 2 of those. Okay? And again, if you need more specifics based beyond what's here on the rubric, let me know. But it's really going to depend on what you want to address. The second section, robustly illustrate 3 of the following. And here you have 5 choices. This is on page 4 of your syllabus.